he had been seen with the gun the day before. He had a history, criminal history of resisting arrest. He was a known Crip gang member. And all those things don't mean that he can be shot, but it's the things that were told at the briefing to Officer Vale before they did or executed that search warrant. And this was a no-knock search warrant, and on the rating scale of the police, it was a very high-risk search warrant because of what was involved there. Even the fact that there was powder fentanyl in the house is something that raises the level of the officers in what they're thinking as the time they go in. And that's what we have to kind of figure out, and we heard what Officer Vale had to say. He said he heard all that things, that he knew that this was a high-risk search warrant of this person, that he was aware of the history. And as they went in, he was the first person in a very narrow hallway. I think it's about 3 foot wide. He's the lead person. His job was to find the person who lived there. He entered the residence, and if you watch the video, which I know that you have, I think there's 24, maybe 26 commands from the officers from the very beginning, before they even entered the house, right where they're at the front door, they're screaming, police officers, search warrant, police officers, yelling, to the point where people that were down the street, several houses away, heard that, okay? So anybody would have heard that occurring. And there were about 12 seconds of that going on, yelling, approaching, going into the residence, that happened before any shot was fired. So Officer Vale is kind of leading that effort to get in the house to search this house that was allowed by the court because of the fentanyl dealing. And as he gets into that hallway and yelling all the time, he doesn't hear somebody say, "I'm here," doesn't have somebody come up with their hands up. An individual runs at him. His words are, "He charged me. At that time, I fired my gun." I couldn't see his hands at that time, and as we're well aware, Mr. Ford didn't have a gun in his hands at that time. He had a loaded AR-15 in the house under his bed, but at the time the shot was fired, he didn't have a gun. Officer Vale didn't know that. There were things that he reasonably believed, that why would a person who's hearing a scream, police officers, wouldn't come out with his hands up, wouldn't comply, and instead charged at him. So he fired the one shot in fear for his life and his fellow officers at the time that this shot was fired. And then everything happens after that with regard to attempted life-saving supports by the officers that are involved in the house. So that's just a kind of a brief summary, but after a complete review of the evidence provided us by the investigative team, based on the evidence as we know it to be and the law on the use of deadly force in Nebraska, we find that the use of deadly force by OPD Officer Vale was legal under the laws of use of deadly force in the state of Nebraska. So that's the conclusion I made based on the evidence and the law and the facts as we know them to be. Again, what we look at and what the law says is that the person who used deadly force have a reasonable belief that that person needed to use deadly force under that situation. We believe, from what Officer Vale said and all the facts as we know them to be, that he did have a reasonable belief. And even the law on the use of deadly force says, and not that this is the case here, says the person who uses deadly force must have a reasonable belief that they had to use that to protect themselves. And it says, the jury instruction says, but even if they're wrong, as long as their belief was reasonable, they're justified and are legal in using that force. So that's where we're at. As prescribed under Nebraska law, a grand jury of citizens will review the investigation also. That's by law. I think, honestly, we have about 10 to 12, I'm not sure what the number is right now. There's been a couple that have come in recently. Grand juries that are set for November. And in every one of those cases, we've made a decision already about what happened in that course of those events. And so we'll have grand juries on those, and then there'll be a grand jury on this one also. And any questions?
Yeah, where's the warrant? Can we access that? We're not able to find it in, our system.
Yeah, I can get a copy of the affidavit.
Okay, yeah, because we just can't find anything recent that would, like, when you're talking about, like, the fentanyl and all that stuff.
I don't know if it's still sealed or not. Obviously, when they did search the house in the course of events, and they found fentanyl, they found other narcotics there. They found the AR-15, the gun, the things that they were looking for, and it doesn't bootstrap anything, but obviously they were correct. There had been two, I think part of the probable cause where there had been, I think at least two controlled buys from Mr. Ford of fentanyl in recent history, and they had seen him in that, on the front porch, I think, of that house the day before with the gun. So, but we certainly can get the affidavit. I don't know if that's been sealed or what it is, but we'll have to check that out and see if that's possible.
Is it true that Mr. Ford was still in his doorway when he was shot? Is it true he was in his underwear, and is it true he was barely awake when he met the officer in the hallway?
Well, factually, I don't know if any, all I know is he had a pair of boxer shorts on, I think. Yeah, and he was in the hallway by the entry of the doorway to the bedroom there, which was in close proximity to Officer Vale, within probably less than 5 feet, somewhere around 6 feet, somewhere in there, a couple of arm lengths, as he was coming out of the door and coming at Officer Vale. So when you say, I don't know if he was, what his status was, but he certainly had to have heard the officer screaming about their presence for at least 10 seconds prior to the encounter with Officer Vale.
What evidence do you have that suggests Mr. Ford charged at Vale, because we cannot see that in the blocked body camera?
Well, we can't see it either. The shield blocks any view of the body. He had a body cam on, it was working, but it just was blocked by the shield. So the only people we have are the witnesses. Officer Vale is the one who says, yeah, he came at me, he rushed me. And no other officers ever heard anything any different than what Officer Vale says. No officer said, well, I saw him put his hands up, or I saw him say, hey, here I am, if you're looking for me, or no compliance at all. And so there are other officers who were able to see something, but none of them saw exactly because of the ballistic shield that Officer Vale had in front of him.
So it's like he said, she said, but he said, but Ford can't, like, defend his actions. I mean, we went from a lunge, from what I had last heard, to now we're charged at him, and he ran toward him. Like, I mean,
well,
immediately.
immediately,
And then we don't have the body camera. I just, yeah.
Immediately after this happened, Officer Vale says he charged me and I fired my gun. You know, I didn't know what he was going to do. I was worried about the other officers and myself. I couldn't see his hands. Officer Vale says that. So, you know, I think it's reasonable to believe, under the circumstances that he had and what he was doing that day, that he thought, I need to protect myself and my fellow officers.
How much did the blocked body cam video, how much of a challenge did that present to you?
Well, I think it'd be nice to, obviously we have body cam in most incidents anymore as they occur. So it's unfortunate that we can't see exactly from a body cam as to what took place. All we know is what the officer told us. And that fits into what he says. I mean, Mr. Ford's body's out, you know, in the hallway when he's laying there. And so, you know, sure, we would like to have a full body cam photo. And my understanding is that Chief Schmatter said something about he's going to have them put it on their helmets now, so it's not blocked by the ballistic shield, which is fine. That's a good idea. I mean, it's something that 20 years ago we never had. And really, I think it's a blessing for everybody's perspective that we have these body cams, cruiser cams, and usually security video, in fact, from different locations where different incidents take place.
My last question for you is,
Yeah.
is there any other alternative views in the shooting from other cameras that are in the home? My understanding is Sunday, the chief said that detectives were drawing up a search warrant to go back into the home for possible other cameras. Are there cameras, and are you in possession of them, and do they show any alternate view of the shooting?
Yeah, we're not aware that they'll show anything. We're aware of the cameras as they existed, but it's our understanding that they were facing out of the house, not the interior of the house. So we're not aware of any video from those cameras that shows the incident as it occurred.
We did review the body worns of the other officers from different angles as well.
And what did those show?
I mean, it was consistent with what the evidence showed. The rest of the facts of the case is.
Have you spoken with the family?
Have I spoken with them?
Did you speak to the family prior to this?
No.
No, okay. I just said, there's just some concerns with the family that, with transparency, there's a lot of, concerns that they have about, evidence and just, saying that he didn't have any recent, crimes that were on record, from his, recently. They were all back from maybe when he was younger, maybe in his early 20s, and so just wondering if you could maybe clarify, if the family's watching, like, the justification of doing a no-knock search warrant and coming in with so much force versus maybe, when he didn't have a whole lot, on paper.
First of all, and I'm not here to say anything bad about Mr. Ford other than he was dealing fentanyl, and there were recent crimes that he committed, like within a few days of this incident occurring, with regard to delivering fentanyl to undercover officers. Mm-hmm. And so, and fentanyl, as we all know, is an extremely dangerous drug. And law enforcement, including the DEA, is doing everything they can to get fentanyl off the streets. And that's part of why this search warrant took place. And the officers knew, the department knew, that this was high risk because of what was involved. If you're involved as a police officer, you know that typically people who have weights of drugs or sell drugs from their house want to protect those drugs from other individuals who might try to rip them off and not be found by the police. So that's what always creates this tense situation when officers enter a house where somebody that they know probably has drugs in there and has been involved in the drug business, because usually they have guns, they want to protect their stash, or they don't want it to be found, and sometimes they're going to use violence to do that, to protect it.
So I've heard from you and from OPD some conversation about the officers giving Ford commands and him not complying with them. But I'm not fully understanding a police search warrant, which to my understanding is the only thing that was sent.
Yes.
Is it a command? Because that seems more like an announcement. It's not show me your hands, announce where you are. Is there something he should have inferred from that announcement?
Well, if you see armed police officers in gear in your house screaming police officers search warrant, I would think that the first thing you would do is say, hey, I'm right here, put your hands up. I think that's an inference that you would imagine. And if you talk to officers that have done this kind of work before, they say most of the time the first thing people do is put their hands up and say, here I am, or I'm in the bedroom, or wherever, because they don't want to have any confrontation.
Is it possible that he was sleeping and was, waking up to this, and maybe he didn't have time to fully respond to what was going on?
I don't know the answer to that, honestly, but I know he came forward and he came at Officer Vale, and that's how the shooting occurred.
What charges did you consider?
Well, whenever you look at it's a homicide. Somebody got killed by somebody's using a gun, so it's all those things that you have to look at with regard to a homicide. But the most important thing there, Molly, is that, was his use of force legal? Because that takes away from whatever elements of, say, a murder charge would be. Okay?
And then you said that he was seen with a gun the day before.
Yes.
Would that be the day before they applied for the search warrant? Because that was like at least a couple of days prior to.
Yeah, I think it was the day before. I'm pretty sure it was just the day before, the evening before.
The day before the search warrant was executed, or
Yes,
applied for?
before it was executed.
Okay.
Can you say where that information came from and where Ford was seen with a gun?
Oh, the police and the DEA were working this case for a while. So they were tracking, they obviously had some buys that occurred with Mr. Ford selling fentanyl. And so that's what this is all about. I mean, this doesn't, honestly, the whole thing doesn't happen. Nothing happens here unless, without Cameron Ford selling fentanyl or delivering fentanyl. That's what precipitates the whole process here. And so that doesn't mean that just because somebody's dealing drugs even that they should be shot. It just means that that's how everything started in this process of a no-knock search warrant, kind of bringing up the history of that he had and the events of going into the house to find the fentanyl.
So was he part of was this part of an operation between, was this like a task force that was executing out this search on him? I mean, was Ford, in your opinion, a big dealer of fentanyl in Omaha?
I'm not at the liberty to even answer that question. You'd have to ask the people in the narcotics division about that. I just know that there's a history. They were obviously had some information that he was dealing. They had purchased fentanyl from him, and that led to all this happening.
How does your review of this case compare to other officer-involved incidents that you've reviewed in the past?
Oh, it's, as I said at the very outset here, it's always you want to make sure you're as thorough as you can be when there's a loss of life, just like at any time, in any case. And so it was a very thorough look at what we had here. There's not a lot of moving pieces here, quite honestly. It's just about what happened in that moments of the execution of that search warrant. So we reviewed all that, we talked, we discussed it, we looked at the law, and came to the conclusion that we did.
Did you ever consider appointing a special prosecutor to the case?
I don't know why I would. I have a job to do, and that's my responsibility, and so I'm not going to put it off on somebody else. It's, like you said, the county attorney's responsibility is to make those determinations every day. And so sometimes maybe it's something that you wouldn't want to have to do, but it's part of the job, and I'm not going to put it off on somebody else.
I'm sorry if this was already said, but do you know how much fentanyl was found? Was it just one gun?
Yeah, there was one AR-15 that was loaded, and I have the amount of fentanyl somewhere in here. I can look, but it was more than one. There were several. I think there were several hundred, if I remember correctly, pills, M30 pills, and 31 grams of suspected fentanyl powder, field tested positive, some other different kinds of pills, and so I know that that's at least what I have here, at least in the inventory. 10 blue pills, 20 white oval pills, 33 grams of marijuana, unknown white powder in plastic baggie located in kitchen, 31 grams of suspected fentanyl powder, field tested positive, white circle pills. So there was several different types of drugs. It was significant.
Those white circle pills, have those been tested?
Not aware if they have or not yet.
Is it true that Officer Vale shot Ford once through the chest? Is that what you find? Or did you
Yeah,
find that?
we looked at that and the results, preliminary autopsy results. He was shot right here in the left area of the chest by the armpit. Bullet entered and went somewhat across hit his spinal cord.
So he was shot once.
Yes. One shot was fired.
Can you talk about what does that tell you about Officer Vale's actions and the training that went into this? One shot versus multiple shots.
What I think about this after watching the video and hearing what Officer Bales said, he thought he had to fire, and he didn't want to have to fire his weapon. He's been involved in, I think, 120 different search warrants. He's never fired his gun. He's never fired his gun in his career. But he thought he had to under that situation. And once the individual that you fire at in your training is down, then you don't fire anymore. The threat's not there anymore. And so that's part of the training of the officers.
From what I understand, Chief Schmatter said Sunday that police typically do, when they do these no-knock search warrants, they breach and then hold. But in this case, there was some penetration into the property. Does that play into your decision at all? Do you have a hand in how police carry out no-knock search warrants? I'm just wondering if there is a different approach police should have taken.
Well, that's a policy issue that you'd have to talk to the police department, law enforcement about. Certainly we have input. They might ask us questions at times if they can or can't do something. Not talking about this case specifically, but at times with regards to effectuating an arrest or a search warrant. You know, one of the reasons that there's a no-knock warrant is officer safety, and also to prevent one of the things that people do that have drugs in their house. If they know the officers are coming in, they're going to get rid of it. So that's to prevent that happening also, being flushed down the toilet or thrown out. And so I know that when these officers went in, there was also a fear that they had that there was powder fentanyl in the house and somehow they might be exposed to that, or it might even be tossed at them, or whatever it might be. And they had, I know there were extra Narcan vials taken in, or one of the officers had, just in case something like that happened. So it's a dangerous situation to be in.
Was the interview with Officer Vale recorded?
Oh, certainly.
And you were able to review that?
Yes.
I've heard some questions about if it was an accident, you know, with him exclaiming, "Oh shit," after the shooting happens. That's kind of what some people have taken away from it. Do you know from your review of his interview if his finger was on the trigger of the gun as he was walking up the hallway?
I don't know if it was on as walking up. I certainly know it was on when he fired the gun.
Right, but.
And I don't think he ever says anything about it being an accident or, yeah.
And then the search warrant, police said it was sealed initially, but you would be okay with that being unsealed if they are?
I don't know a reason at this point in time, other than there's going to be a grand jury looking at it at some point in time, what would be the problem with, I'm for you being able to see it. I think that's important for people to be transparent and know what's there. So I'll see what I can do with regard to that sealing.
Could you talk a bit more about what the grand jury will review, just so people have a better idea of what that process is like?
Sure. It's just like every case that we have before the grand jury, and I've done them many of those over the years. They get everything. One of the things I want to make sure, and now it's good, I think, that anybody can see a transcript of what took place in that grand jury after the grand jury takes place. One of the things that's very clear in these is I mark all the police reports, all the exhibits, all the photographs, and I put them on a table, and I ask the grand jury they can peruse those anytime during the course of our grand jury. And then they understand what the law is from the standpoint of what their charge is, because the presiding judge gives them a charge. Here's what your duties and responsibilities are. Your responsibilities are to see if there's any criminal conduct on the part of anyone that caused this person's death while they were either in custody or being apprehended. And so they're well aware of what the charge is, and then we'll put evidence on, and then I always ask them or the foreperson, is there anything else that you want to hear about this case before you make a decision? And so it's their call. And that's what this is. You know, the grand jury process, in my estimation, the legislature wanted another set of eyes to look at. This is kind of a check and balance situation. We made a decision, and now a group of citizens can see what happened. And I think it's very good that citizens take a look at this and really kind of opens their eyes, quite frankly, and talking to them afterwards, that, wow, I didn't realize that sometimes what sort of situations officers had to be involved in. So,
Throwing out the timeline of how you got to your conclusion today, is this faster than normal? Is this a typical kind of within a week of the incident happening?
I think every case is unique, so it depends on what you're looking at as far as making that decision. We had all the evidence we thought that we could possibly get at this point in time, and I didn't want to sit on this any longer. We made a decision, and I think we're very satisfied that we had an opportunity to look at everything that we need to look at to make that decision, and including the law.
Talks, or pending talks, but
Yeah.
that's not gonna
It won't
determine what
change anything.
How many officers have you charged in the past? I'm just thinking of the last time an officer,
Well, I charged an officer with first-degree sexual assault a few years ago.
well, maybe
And
more of his
so-
capacity.
I charged people in the Bear Heels case.
That was like the last time when it was involving maybe like someone being killed in a significant way. Like
Yeah, and there were people that were charged in regards to a guy that died in the old Omaha Police Station jail. And I think that led to that jail being closed. So that case, there was the Bear Heels case. There's other cases involving police officers that didn't go to a grand jury that they committed crimes, and certainly they were charged. So that's not something that's we're afraid to do, I guess, if that's the question. I don't know.
The statement Officer Vale made, the expletive statement, what did you make of that?
I think that the last thing this is my opinion about these officers that are involved in these things. The last thing that the officer wants to do when they go to work that day is to have to pull their gun out and fire it at somebody. They just want to go home with their family, just like everybody else does. And so when that happened, it was just a reaction like, shit, and that's what the words that he used, and, that he had to fire his gun and,
Adrenaline?
deal with it. Well, I don't know if it's adrenaline that caused him to say what he said. I think it's more of,
And then, will there be any new evidence introduced when this goes to a grand jury? Is there any more evidence to collect?
there really isn't. I think Brenda already mentioned that we're still waiting for a toxicology on Mr. Ford, but that's about the only thing that I'm aware of that's out there, that might be something that be different than what we've heard today.
Is this a DEA warrant with OPD assistant?
I don't know the answer to that, who the affiant was, but I know the DEA is involved in this investigation because of what's involved here with the fentanyl. Okay.
On a side note, are you considering possible vehicle homicide charges for the death in front of UNO, that crash that happened yesterday?
Okay.
Can we wait till-
That
I'm
one
sorry
kind of
to interrupt
threw
you.
me a little bit, but that's something that I was briefed a little bit on yesterday, and we're just waiting for the police to finish that investigation, so we'll see what comes out of that. There's been a lot of things going on that case. There's the motorcycle chase that happened on 120th Street, this case, so there's been a lot of stuff going on, but I haven't been formally briefed on that yet.
My apologies. I was
No,
trying
that's
to wait till
okay.
the end.
All right,
Yeah, I want to kind of just maybe circle back to
Sure.
why we're here. Thinking about when you're talking about, and I know this is more of maybe an opinion conversation, but thinking about when someone is in, like Officer Vale, he's got the shield on, he's got presumably a helmet on, he's very physically has like basically armor on to protect himself going into a house, thinking possibly maybe there's a gun, maybe there might be an interaction, and can you talk about the split decisions that maybe they have to make? I mean, you're talking about someone coming out of a doorway in boxers. That's obviously, the playing field just is not level in that situation. and there's a lot of moving parts and going on. I just am trying to figure out maybe if there was room for a pause before he discharged his weapon.
Well, when the person's about 5 feet away from you and you don't know if they have a gun or not in their hands, and you know all the background information that you've been given about that person. We're not talking about somebody who just has an encounter on the street with someone. We're talking about somebody that they're doing a high-risk warrant on because of what that person's involved in, what that person's history is, all those kinds of things. So those things make a difference. You know, I understand what you're saying, and certainly the fact that he didn't have a gun on him, but the officer didn't know that at the time. He just says, I couldn't see his hands, he's coming at me, and he's close proximity, so I fired.
Did you say where Ford's hands were, or where he?
He just said I didn't see his hands.
Are you categorizing him since it was high risk, are you categorizing Ford as dangerous?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
His score was extremely high.
Yeah, I mean,
That's danger,
As it,
the risk going in.
yeah.
Do you think putting body cameras on a helmet will prevent a situation like this from happening again when there's, like, to give you and your office a first-hand account of what truly happened rather than just relying on an officer's statement?
Well, I don't think it's going to prevent things, but it's certainly going to give us hopefully a better look, and that's the purpose. I mean, we didn't always have body cams, and so we made decisions, but now it's easier for everyone involved to have a body cam view, and certainly we're glad that that's something that we have the benefit of now. And certainly what we would hope is it gives us a better view of what took place.
And all this is unusual, right, given that the body camera was blocked and what happened? It was unusual.
Well, I don't know if it's unusual. I mean, but there has to be something different so that it's not blocked. You know, either you could even put it on the shield itself or something. I don't know if that's possible, but certainly we would like to have something so we could have a better view and a better picture, I guess. But we don't always have the luxury of that anyway. We certainly have body cam, we certainly have video, we have security video in a lot of cases. Sometimes we don't. But certainly with officer-involved things, we'd like to have the idea of being able to see what happened rather than just hear what happened.
Well, taking a step back, you said that this is all because of fentanyl. Can you just talk about how fentanyl is present in the community?
Well, you know, again, I could talk about those things, and I've talked about it before, you know, with regard to the dangers of fentanyl. We've had young people who've taken a pill thinking it's a Percocet and died because it was fentanyl, high school kids. We've had I think Dr. Lindy gave me some graphs about 400% increase in fentanyl deaths, overdose deaths, and opioid deaths in Douglas County, probably in the last 4 years. So it's an extremely dangerous drug. And it's high risk whenever you're dealing with it, and it's high risk for people to be involved in that business. So, you know, everything needs to be done. And I'm not saying that, again, don't misinterpret. I'm not saying if somebody's dealing fentanyl, that means the police can go shoot him. But it certainly is a factor with regards to things that take place in law enforcement.
Going back to just quickly what Alex was saying about the camera being kind of hidden by the shield, is that something that you often have to work around when you're dealing with someone who's in full gear, like no-knock search warrants and things like that? Or is this was kind of like the first time that maybe something was obscured like that?
Well, again, every case is different, but if you knew this hallway in that house was like 3 feet wide, sometimes we're not dealing with a situation like that where, you know, only one person could go in the hallway at one time. The other officers had to be behind Officer Vale. Sometimes they can come in together and people could see differently, but because of the situation of the type of house they were in and how small that hallway was, that made a difference on anybody's ability to visually see what was taking place. Okay? Thank you. Anything else you want to add?
No.
and I'll look into that.
Yeah, it's just, we couldn't find it, so we just curious. Yeah, OPD said they were sealed, and they replied.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see.
You have to go in front of the
Sometimes
judge, right?
it depends on, there might have to be some things that,
Right,
if there's a
right,
person.
redacted. Would you mind, just, I mean, did you have any other questions about other stuff then? You wanted to-
Any other questions?
No, not you, I just said,
You
yeah,
have-
no.
you do have-
I know, I always have questions.
And more of it homicides, but specifically, it seems to have been like a lot of motorcyclists.
Are most of them wearing helmets?
A mix, but.
Well, the guy was wearing a helmet Saturday night.
Right.
It was,
Yeah. Mm.
yeah.
Also, I wanted to ask about is it Lizzie Lewis? Yeah. What's that?
Want to know anything about it?
Yeah. Do you know, well, that's why I opened it up for you. I know.
Yes, I do know something about that.
Okay. Well, I was wondering, do you know, possibly a motive behind why they were, what was the
I
connection
don't
between
know
all
that she
of
was
them?
the person that was the intended.
She wasn't
victim.
intended?
Yeah, it was somebody else that was near her, probably. So
It's
that's
the
something about.
territory too, just,
Yeah. But
That's
she was,
just terrible. to
it's
say.
a
I
horrible.
know, because I can't remember how far